Francisco d'Ancona.
Watching, we know you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah viewers. We're very fortunate to have Usman Qureshi, former head teacher, educationalist, and community activist, join us today in the studio to discuss some of the ideas which are behind an essay he wrote on madrasa education in the UK and Islamic education, to explore some of those ideas, to see what led him to write that piece and explore potentially what are some of the outcomes and ramifications of those viewpoints. Usman, welcome. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, your essay is I know actually the the fruit of a much deeper reflection on some of these issues. You know, for the benefit of the audience, I know that you've been, as I said in your brief intro, a former head teacher. You also have some academic background in Islamic or in educational theory as well. You're not out of that sector, but you have, I think, given it considerable thought. And the essay which you wrote, which is on our website, you point out some concerns and criticism. Would you like to elaborate on what some of those are?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salam ala rasulillah. Yeah, I think to call it an essay actually would be to probably give it more than its due. I think when I wrote it at the time, it was 2012, it was pretty much a sort of a culmination of a number of frustrations that I was having at that time, and I would say it's probably more just a way that I wanted to express some of what I was feeling and actually start a dialogue. Because I say at the end of the piece that it's something that I'd like to start, because I think that's very important. The article was essentially based around the way that children learn the Qur'an in the Madrasah system. But as you said, my sort of thoughts are a little bit wider. At that time, I suppose it was really focused on the Madrasah and the Qur'an. It really is more of an opinion piece. I think when you sit down with other people and you're discussing in your local area, okay, what the local masajid are doing, and more critically at the time, I think what we were discussing, what the situation of young people is, okay, in the UK and how we can have a positive effect, then I always felt that the madrasa was the concept of the madrasa system that we have here is slightly problematic at times, okay.
Could you perhaps disentangle or clarify precisely what you mean by that? Because I think for a number of people who have, there will be people who are very familiar with Islamic education, out of school Islamic education, and others who aren't. For the benefit of both, broadly speaking, there is the after school and weekend madrasa, and then there is the more traditional South Asian madrasa, full-time madrasa that children are enrolled in to undertake memorization of the Qur'an and then move on to an alim program. Are your concerns about both, one, and if so, which one?
I think my concerns are not about the latter. I suppose that would be a Darul Uloom type institution that you're talking about.
Yes.
I mean, well, there may be concerns, I have no idea, but that certainly was not the focus of my discussion. And as far as I know, the productivity of those sort of institutions on the whole is very good.
Right.
I think mine is the former. Okay?
Right, you're speaking more of the after-school madrasa or the weekend madrasa.
Exactly.
Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's difficult to say without any certainty because, look, we really don't have any statistics. We don't have any evidence base in which to make these claims, or certainly I don't. Okay, as I said, this article was just, I suppose, a minor rant about an issue that I feel quite deeply about. But you see, the core issue here for me is the notion of tarbiyah. Okay, and that's bringing up our children in a way where actually they feel empowered to be Muslimin. Okay, they feel that Islam is a strength, a source of strength for them as part of their identity living here in the UK. Okay, and my experiences tell me that actually that intention, if ever it was, I mean, I suppose, people who lead these madrasas could turn around and say, well, that's never really our intention. That's not even our remit, to be honest. We're just here to essentially make sure that they can read the Qur'an and learn some surahs that are important to them. And I suppose...
Right. We can widen it out, but for a moment, if we actually, for the moment, actually start off by zooming in, and then perhaps we'll step back and look more broadly at this institution. You alluded to the fact that it started off by, and in the essay in particular, or as you said, the thought piece, shall we call it, rather than the essay. In the thought piece you wrote, a concern about the way the Qur'an is taught in these after-school madrasas. Could you say some more about what your concerns are about that? Could you elaborate why you were concerned about that? How it's going wrong on the basis of your experience. I'm well aware, to reiterate that you have qualified and said this is sort of based on your own personal experience. It's quite wide. I can speak. I know it's quite wide, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, I really do feel like sort of caveating that and saying that I know some fantastic people who are doing some fantastic work in madrasas, and I know that children are not only benefiting in terms of their Islam, but certainly the Qur'an and their learning of the Qur'an. But my experiences so far have led me to believe, led me to understand that actually the madrasa seems to be a little more than, I suppose, a dumping ground for children. That's my perception. Okay, that parents have they feel an obligation to ensure that their children are taught the Qur'an. Okay, but my problem is not actually with the methodology employed within the madrasa, because again, I've undertaken no study to actually, realize what that is. Okay, but it's more this idea that, okay, well, my children need to learn the Qur'an. Let me just put them in a madrasa. Oftentimes with people who are from abroad, they're not from this country, and they have very particular methods or means, I suppose, in ensuring that children stick to learning the Qur'an. And as a child who went through the madrasa system for a period of time, not a very long period of time, my own feeling is that it can be quite dispiriting trying to learn the Qur'an in that way. Okay, I suppose not really. I won't sort of carry on more about my own background, but what I will say is that you have instances, I know, because I was the head teacher of an Islamic school. I know that there are parents out there who actually, their attachment to the Qur'an, I'm not saying that they're not attached to the Qur'an in any way, but the amount of effort and emphasis and drive that they have for their children to learn the Qur'an doesn't seem to often match up, in their own sort of lives and the way that they talk about it. Okay, so that's a concern that I have, that actually, is the Qur'an just being made to be something that is learnt within 2 hours of sitting in the madrasa, and then actually when you come home, it doesn't really matter about the Qur'an. The Qur'an is then just as important as any other subject.
Right, so almost it appears what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is almost like a cultural imperative that a number of parents feel that they have to fulfill. There is no real strong... There is a fear, in your case perhaps, of a potential lack of any real strong spiritual attachment to the Qur'an and a spiritual drive for their children to learn the Qur'an. It is, as I said, trying to summarize your point, a cultural imperative, and one they feel obliged to fulfill, which they do so by farming out that responsibility, by relegating it to somebody else, that the mosque can fulfill that for me. For 2 hours, I'm willing to pay them a little bit of money for my child to basically learn the Qur'an, because it's what I'm supposed to do culturally. It's expected of me. The Qur'an is not present in my life personally. As a family, a head of the family, or the parents, we're speaking about both parents, the husband and the wife, they don't really bring the spirit of the Qur'an into the house. The child just is exposed to it for a few hours a day, and then they come back and there is no more Qur'an in their lives. And once they leave the madrasa, if I perhaps let you carry on,
Yeah,
what do you
I
think,
think
will
again,
occur?
I think it should be said. It must be said. Okay, that fundamentally those parents actually taking their children to a madrasa is praiseworthy. You know,
Right, yeah.
there are probably a lot of people out there who would just say, well, you know, you don't need to learn the Quran at all. So I mean, I think that shouldn't be forgotten.
Right.
you
So
know,
once
yeah.
we acknowledge that, though,
Yeah.
you are still concerned.
What I'm
that
concerned
at that
about,
point, it's
yeah.
not. Those parents should be. We need to sort of perhaps.
What I'm concerned about is that essentially there shouldn't be a contradiction of the message. Okay, once a parent says to their child that the Quran is important for you to learn, okay, then it's not just important for the child to learn; it's important for the parents to learn as well. Otherwise, its importance only exists up to a certain stage of your life. You know, when you are no longer able to attend the madrasa, okay, does that mean that the Quran in your life is now over?
Is that perhaps though because those parents don't actually recognize the importance of the Quran in that particular way? For them, literally, what they understand, or what they've perhaps misunderstood, is the only thing their child really needs to do is to be able to read the Arabic Quran, and that's it. So what they're doing is essentially teaching them to read the Arabic Quran, potentially actually because at some stage culturally back in history, an underlying juristic idea being that to fulfill your prayer you have to be able to read the Quran in Arabic, which is kind of fed into the culture. So in a number of non-Arabic speaking societies now, that can only be achieved by a child spending a little bit of time, for a child who doesn't want to specialize in Islamic studies, by going to a madrasa. And so they have to learn to be able to read the Arabic Quran. So in that sense, I mean, do you want to pick up on that? Well, that's all that they believe they have to do.
I mean, you know, it's difficult to talk about these topics without, you know, delving into a person's intention and what they want. I think again, you know, it should be said that if that is their intention, that's praiseworthy. But if you're looking at, you know, are we trying to develop just people who can parrot fashion, just, you know, regurgitate portions of the Quran? You know, at a sort of an Eid Milan party where they stand up and start reciting. So the Quran, I suppose, okay, is the way that I see it. It should be a source for helping to build young people and for them to be able to sort of realize their Islamic identity. Not so much as a, you know, well, okay, I've read my chapter of the Quran and, you know, that's it, I've done my job, okay? Or for parents to see the Quran in that role or that way. I mean, if that's the case, okay, then actually, you know...
I mean, you've said that they're praiseworthy for that limited intention, but you're making, you know, an additional point.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're trying to see it as a source of our spiritual fulfillment or nourishment, okay, then I would question whether or not we're actually going to see that in the way that, and I mentioned in the article, I suppose, it's sort of a tick box mentality or attitude towards the Quran. Okay, the Quran is nurun wa huda. Okay, it's light and guidance. Where is that guidance being realized? Okay, if we have that type of relationship with the Quran, rather it should be something which is imbued within our lives. Okay, and it's a necessary part of our lives, not just in the madrasa, but at home, within the community, during the salawat, everywhere where young people especially get to see that as a source of guidance.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair, Osman. Okay, Osman, so we finished off with you discussing your or kind of summarizing your view about why you find that the teaching of the Quran that's handed over by parents to mosques in particular, that feature, why you find it to be, you know, I think perhaps a word you might use to summarize it, an impoverished view, an impoverished attitude towards the Quran and the full range of scope of that it can play in a Muslim's life. So if we move on from that and extend out the discussion, not just to how the Quran is taught in madrasas, but generally more wide-ranging view of some of your concerns about how Islamic education and how the inculcating of Islamic values is being approached by Muslim parents.
Yeah, I think it is widening the discussion probably more than I mentioned in the article, but I think it's sort of you know, it's the idea of, you know, the PSHE, for example, okay, that children are taught in school, okay, how to actually be better individuals living in society. For me, it's that notion actually that you could take someone through a worksheet, okay, and at the end of that worksheet, right, you're going to have someone who is, spiritually better, or more improved, or they somehow have inculcated the actual value system, okay, just by going through a worksheet. That sort of approach seems to me extremely problematic. Okay?
Right. What you, I think perhaps are alluding to, or what you might be saying, I think if I'm understanding you correctly, is that parents are compartmentalizing the aspect of Islamic tarbiyah far too much. It's boxing it off, whereas what they should be doing to make it genuinely successful is trying to make it pervade their own lives, pervade their own lives, their family life. Otherwise, the child will very quickly.
Well, there's two things to this. Okay, first of all, I mean that's secondary. Okay.
Yes.
But primarily, it's this idea that knowledge itself, okay, just by imparting knowledge, actually somehow develops an individual in terms of how they, I suppose, how they act as Muslims, or behave as Muslims, behave as people. That's primarily something that I take issue with. Okay, that if you sort of say, well, okay, you can just sort of sit someone down, let them read a primer in an Islamic text of any science,
like a Ta'limul Haq type book, perhaps.
Exactly,
in many of these schools.
And then after you go through that course, okay, then essentially what you're going to find at the end of it is someone who is spiritually enlightened, okay, and is, I don't know, the next Imam Ghazali of our time, or something along those lines. Okay, obviously there's a bit of exaggeration there, but the point that I'm trying to make is that in order to, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ did. If we go back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the thing that he was really focusing on, essentially right at the beginning, was this notion of being an example, qudwa hasana, being an example, demonstrating how the belief, okay, whatever he was imparting at Dar al-Arqam and then at Medina, for example, that whatever he was telling them from the Qur'an, he was also implementing it in his life and being an example. And so that's the aspect that you were talking about, okay? That when actually we try and say, okay, we're living our lives as Muslimin, it's not enough to say, well, okay, I've sent my child to an Islamic school, or I sent my child to a madrasa, and therefore I've now, you can't sort of abdicate your responsibility and say, that's it, I'm done. Because if what is in the home doesn't marry with what's being taught as the knowledge, okay, in the school or the madrasa,
the child sees a disconnect.
Of course, there's a conflict, there's a
and
contradiction.
Children, I think you would suggest perhaps, I'll let you elaborate more, but children are very quick to spot intuitively that kind of double standards or kind of disparity.
Well, I think anyone would be. I think that it doesn't even have to be children, but children are necessarily more sensitive about things that they find to be a little bit more of a chore. It's something that parents have discussed for ages. I discuss it regularly with my wife about how to encourage our children, because some of those things are more, can seemingly be a little bit more mundane, okay?
Right.
And that's why, we know the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed Jibreel the Jannah and the Jahannam, the paradise and the hellfire, and he adorned the paradise with difficulties, and he adorned the hellfire with those things, or those acts, or that people would naturally lean to more. And it's the state of who we are. So if we expect children especially to be able to read a text and come back and sort of, you expect them to be entrenched in belief and be working on their deen and working on their iman all the time, while you're not demonstrating or leading the way as a parent or as a teacher or as a community member, then actually that's potentially causing contradiction in the mind of that young person. Whereas,
where do you think that might lead? And again, as the child grows up and moves into adulthood.
But it depends. We can see it. I suppose everyone has their own experiences, but you have people who are unfulfilled, okay, by this vision of Islam that they've never actually seen actualized or practiced in their life. They can basically sort of say, well, this is just a cultural aspect of my life, right? I live in the West, and really, the culture of the West seems progressive. It seems as though it's moving forward. It seems as though it's equal. It's
so
not
as
equal,
they sort of move into adolescence, and then through adolescence into adulthood, Islam almost gets left behind as a childhood experience, something that happened to them as children.
Well, exactly.
They sort of maybe
because
appreciate
even-
its cultural background, but it has no meaning in their lives as adults moving forward
So a
as
practical
members
example,
of society.
a practical example, without obviously mentioning anyone, is that a parent came to me and said, "My daughter is, she's got a boyfriend," and this person's horrified. I know, this person. Well, Allah's grace and fadl, they pray. But any other ihtimam, any other concern of importance towards the deen, reading the Qur'an regularly or doing anything in that manner, okay, that sort of demonstrates a love, okay, or desire, or going to the masjid, even for Jum'ah. This doesn't really feature as being very important. If we had discussions about Islam, it was always the case that, well, okay, that's all your opinion, very nice, okay. But at the end of the day, when his daughter did start going out with a boy, and he said to her, well, this is against our religion, okay, then she turned around and said to him, you've never really spoken about religion before. It's all very convenient that you are now. So where do you have a position? You have no moral position, because it all becomes relative. If Islam is nothing more than just cultural attitudes that you have in your life, then culture can be supplanted with another one very easily. And that's part of the problem going forward, if that's what you're asking.
Right, yeah, no, I think expressed very eloquently. So, I mean, you're, again, perhaps trying to summarize your views. You're saying that Islam, in a lot of these households, then is not sufficiently a lived reality, and then therefore it's very easily forgotten and left behind as they move, as those children become adults. And as children, they already see the sort of the double standards. Perhaps I think, Matt, we should caveat what you had said with the idea that for many of those parents, or at least many perhaps might be a difficult word to substantiate. Some of those parents, the desire is that when they send them to those schools, the desire is okay. With many of those. Yep, with many of those parents. Am I ready to go? Yeah. So with some of those parents, the intention is, again, linking it back to the Qur'an and how the cultural imperative might have some original juristic underpinning to it. Here, what they're doing is expecting their children just to learn some sort of basic, fundamental, obligatory aspects of their faith. What in terms of purity is required, what in terms of the rituals is absolutely required. There is, and I think perhaps you could comment on this, again, really what's happening, perhaps it seems to me, is a separating between just some basic juristic, in Arabic terms, fiqhi, obligatory knowledge that the children have to learn, from a spiritual attachment to faith. There is a separation, I guess, of the outward practice from an inward reality.
Yeah, I suppose you could say there's a distinction between the text and the spirit, okay, of the religion, okay. So the spirit would actually it would actually inculcate a lot more, okay, because actually what you're then doing is that you're trying to see through the lens of the religion, rather than sort of saying, well, okay, we know, or our parents told us that praying, for example, is important. And again, I think you caveated it well. I mean, no one's sort of saying that's a very good thing, and I think that no one,
or according to whichever sort of fiqh school that you belong to, that in the prayer you must you must know that you have to do A, B, C, and D, and that X, Y, and Z break the prayer. A, B, and C are required in the purification. Absolutely. X, Y, and Z, and that's break the purification.
It's praiseworthy, but that's not something that I'm saying is bad.
Right.
But I'm saying that if we want,
but that's a very, again, short place to stop at. Yeah.
Right. It's sort of a very limited view of what it means to be a Muslim. If we understand that Islam is submitting, okay, yourself to God, all right, or being in His obedience, then actually that necessitates that every aspect of your life is then viewed from that prism. Okay.
Do you care to say? I mean, do you have any thoughts on why you think that very limited understanding, and that again, that very perhaps you could use the word stunted vision of Islam is problematic, or could lead to problems for the Muslim community if it's not tackled in the coming months and years, here in the West?
The only way that I suppose I could describe it is having gone to Pakistan very recently and having come back, I found, the beauty of going to a place like Pakistan is that actually you can pray almost anywhere. There's masajid there anywhere that you go, right? So going into these masajid, you find an acute shortage, okay, of young people in those masajid. Okay, I didn't go to every single masjid, but being in Lahore, in a main city, and talking with lots of young people, okay, I found that sort of spiritual connection was very weak with their deen. In fact, I probably know more practicing young people over here than I do over there, okay? But I would say that once Islam becomes something which is just part of your life, okay,
is there also
or
the notion,
normalized? Sorry, yeah.
Is there also the notion, though, that the concern perhaps that I sense in what you're saying, that given the stronger challenges that Muslims are facing, I mean, perhaps if we move it back to us, the stronger challenges that we're facing is that very stunted vision of Islam won't be enough to protect those individuals moving forward from the spiritual challenges they may face.
I don't think it's enough in some ways. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. You can't predict how these things are going to happen. But what I'm trying to say is that I think that we're sleepwalking into this mode of trying to make everything in our life halal, okay? So that actually we don't need to think about it. We don't need to be engaged with the issues, because now we've got our children in a halal environment. We've got halal restaurants. We've got halal this, and we abdicate our thinking.
That's an excellent way of rounding up what you had to say. Uthman, Jazakallah khair for coming in and having a discussion about these views. I know you hold them, very passionately, and they matter a lot to you, and I think they should matter to all of us. It was very enlightening listening to Uthman. It was very food for thought. I think everybody would agree about how we should be approaching as a Muslim community our attitude to educating our children, how we should be teaching them the Qur'an, and more broadly, how we should be inculcating values and teachings of Islam to our children, so that it really meaningfully embeds in their lives and is something that will empower them, give them identity, and help them tackle adult life in the years to come. For more information on this particular concept and this particular idea, please go back and read Usman's article on the website. There are also many other interesting and thought-provoking articles on the website, some of which will form the basis of future episodes and discussions, for which I hope you will come back and join us. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.